Welcome to the Taylor Made Tasty podcast. I'm Taylor, retired serial quitter turned goal boss coach, speaker, and consultant. I believe a beautiful life starts with a beautiful mindset. Join me as we amplify confidence, resilience, and actionable tools on the road to quit quitting on you and your vision. You are worthy of your goals, so let's go get there. Hey y'all, welcome back to another episode of Taylor Made Tasty, the podcast. Today's episode features a guest by the name of Stephanie Costello, and we will be discussing how not taking things personally changes your view of life. With media and social media, we have developed different relationships with family and friends, maybe even an openness that we hoped wasn't there with things they say or things they post. Stephanie and I will be talking through vulnerability and courage, how we can't have one without the other, along with how to achieve not taking things personally through communication with love and ease. A little bit about our guest. Stephanie has over 10 years of experience in the mental health field, working with individuals ranging from 6 years old to 50 years old, attending school for criminal justice, human services, and psychology. Stephanie has learned the essential skills to relationship building. If you are ready to take action and build a healthy relationship, both with yourself and others in your life, this episode is for you. Please help me welcome Stephanie, and let's get into it. Welcome to the podcast, Stephanie. I am so excited to have this conversation with you today.
Thank you. Me too.
Mainly because I have read the book, The Four Agreements, a few times. And there's a chapter where the author talks about taking anything personally and about not taking anything personally, which I feel like is easier said than done, like a hard pill to swallow, right? And so I'm excited about this conversation because I think if we felt like we could control not taking things personally, we would choose to do so. So that feels like a great way to life would be to not take things personally, but again, easier said than done. And it doesn't really happen that often in life, I feel like. So how can you explain how does taking things personally have an effect on our lives overall?
Yes, absolutely. Such a great question. One of the things that I like to kind of akin this sort of exercise to is like physical fitness, just emotional fitness, right? If it's not a skill that has never been exercised, then it's not something we're going to be good at. And there's a lot of the thing about emotional health or mental wellness or whatever word you want to put on it that feels good for you. Um, it, it's a consistent activity. It's a consistent journey that we're on. It's never a destination we get to when we're exercising our emotional health. As well as they're sort of like invisible. It's not like things that you can say I've achieved not taking things personally, forever.
Mm-hmm.
Like it's I've succeeded at achieving this. It's I did good at doing it today, and I'm gonna come back to the game and do it again tomorrow. And then there'll be certain times and situations where it just gets easier and easier and easier because you've had enough experience in that one similar situation that you're able to come at it from a place of openness and vulnerability instead of kind of fear and defensiveness.
Yeah, absolutely. And I always love that because I think that once you sort of relate it to physical fitness, there's also sort of data involved because you can see yourself growing. And that's exactly what we want is we like practice things and put them into practice of, okay, let's work on taking things less personally to a certain point, then we can see over time that consistency actually manifests in our life. And maybe we're put in a situation at work or in the home that you're like, oh, wow, I actually kind of moved through that feeling and didn't take what that person said so personally, which like I think brings a great amount of self-awareness. And self-awareness being one of the things that I preach as being a key to crushing our goals. So I was curious, like in the simplest form, can you explain some ways that we can identify that we are taking things personally, and then how self-awareness could help with goal setting and eventually like hitting our goals by not taking things as personally?
Yes. So like this, I just get so pumped and jazzed from these conversations. Like my brain's going ping, 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 ping. Like there's so many things I want to say. Um, I want to touch a little bit on your point about consistency piece, right? Self-awareness does come from consistency, but again, it's important to remember it's a consistent journey. And so, um, being intuitive about where what you can provide in this day to whatever you have on your list of things to do, right? Like if the stars aren't aligned and the full moon is driving you nuts, and like maybe if you're an individual with a uterus, you're on your cycle or whatever it is, right? Like maybe things are just not working for you in that day. Accepting that today is just not your day, and today is not a day to try to push yourself. Today is a day of just accepting it is what it is, not as you would like it, right? Being not taking things personally. Like sometimes there's things are just the way they are, and there's nothing we can do today because today is just a tough day. That's that intuition, that self-awareness, and where that really comes. The second piece I wanted to add to that was with the consistency piece. It takes a consistent effort of showing up with vulnerability and courage, and optimism instead of pessimism, right? It takes a significant amount of thoughts and efforts to be open-minded, to be to think you're going to do great things today instead of fighting against all of your fears. Dr. Carol Dweck wrote a book called Mindset, and it's a very dry read, but it's got a lot of great information in it. And she talks about growth or lack mindset. And if you show up with lack, and you know you're showing up with lack, that's where the self-awareness piece comes into play. And then the consistency piece comes into play when you're like, F that lack, I'm about growth. And then using growth thoughts and growth statements and growth words, and just having very specific go to statements that you might use to help you with that growth mindset. And one of them, like I said earlier, for me is it is what it is, not as you would like it. That is a great reminder for me that sometimes there's certain things that I want the way I want them, and I just can't have them that way right now, and that's okay. The next piece is deciding what action you're going to take. That's a deeper conversation though. That we already had a very complex conversation so far.
Yeah, no, definitely. I believe in the action that you want to take is where we're going to get to some sort of resolution, whether it's within ourselves or with somebody else, right? But that's the identifying. I kind of wanted to get into like how we some of the ways that we can identify that we're taking things personally. Like, is there something that happens with our actions or within our body or within our mind that we can be aware of? Okay, I'm maybe taking this personally.
Yes, absolutely. So the great, thank you for helping me go back to parts of the question that are important. The intuition piece, right? So I didn't really much further into. I just said intuition. A lot of us are disconnected from our body. We often are just live in our minds and live in our thoughts, and that there's a new sort of mind body connection messaging, which is really important. And it's important to know that your that whole gut instinct, right? That's a real thing. We have nerves that run through our body that it's just our body is responding instead of our brain. And so getting in tune with what your body is telling you is really, really important. And so you might feel it in your chest. You might feel it in your throat. you might feel it in your back, you might feel it in your stomach, you might feel it like in your temples or in your head, right? Um, and in order to really figure out where you might feel it, the next time you're in a potentially conflicting situation where it's not going the way you want it to, and you're starting to take things a little personally from the other person, sit back and take one or maybe two deep breaths and then figure out, where am I feeling this in my body right now? That's the step one, is awareness around what your body is trying to tell you. And then from there, it really takes somebody, if you've never done that work before, it does take somebody to help you with discovering, okay, what's my chest trying to tell me? What's my throat trying to tell me? What's my shoulders trying to tell me? And making a move for yourself that's going to result in a healthy transition instead of, oftentimes we pick impulsive transitions. So would you like to respond, or do you want me to keep going?
Yeah, no, that's great.
Okay.
I think that a lot of the time our body is so in tune with what we're feeling that it does manifest in some way physically. So whether that's like our palms are getting sweaty or your heart rate goes up,
Yes.
right? And you're like, oh, that feels either a little more rapid or tight or something like that, right? And so
Yeah.
paying attention to those cues is so important. And I also am curious if, like, how is there a level, I guess, or a scale of taking things personally? Like, we, and the reason behind it, like, why are we taking things personally? Because I coach a lot about reflection and reflecting on our actions or inaction when it comes to our goals, visions, and dreams. And I feel like taking things personally comes from a feeling of lack inside of ourselves about whatever it is. It could be somebody's handbag, it could be somebody's vacation, it could be somebody's like job or whatever. It comes from a point of lack within ourselves, or what we think we are lacking is kind of how I see it. So then if something comes up where somebody mentions your old bag, or you're not working hard enough on this project, or what, like, oh, and they can do things better than you in your mind, if you will, like, from comparison, is like, where does is there a scale of how we take things personally, like the healthier side of it, and then the like more extreme side of it, where, okay, this is a problem that we need to lean into and figure out.
Yes, great question. So I wouldn't say that there's a scale, but I would say that there are some ways that we might take things personally. Like as parents, we can sometimes be proud of our children in a way that is taking it a little too personally, right? So like, oh, I helped them achieve it, instead of like, great job, kiddo. So that can be like one healthy, but borderline, like be careful with that kind of taking things personally. And then to to share the part of where there's not really a scale, is we all have our own scale. There is no book that tells us what our emotional operating system is. We have to discover what that is, and that is based on nature and nurture, genetics, intergenerational patterns passed down to us by other generations, and how we're living out those patterns. Even if we've never heard of the stories before, we carry on our family's past traumas. We live it daily in ourselves. And then nature, our experience growing up in the community, the socioeconomic status, the social identities, like all of the socialized pieces to who we are as a person, also play a role in how or why we take things personally. And so, what does that mean? The story in your head. What is the story in your head that you wake up with daily, on a daily basis? What is the story that you're telling yourself every single morning? Are you telling yourself you're not good enough? Are you telling yourself you're failing your children? Are you telling yourself you're bombing your financial status? Are you telling yourself you're never going to succeed like Brene Brown, right, in your business, or something along those lines? Like, what are the stories that you're telling yourself? And that's where, back to what I was chatting about earlier with the daily habits and the awareness, is choosing the story you want to have, being aware of the story you have, and choosing the one intentionally that you'd rather be living out. Because what you think, you make happen. So
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So now that we have kind of talked about how it manifests in our body and like being aware of that scale of whatever your
yeah,
internal scale is of taking things personally, what are some like actionable tools if we're in the moment? So we're like, oh, okay, I'm feeling my hands are a little clammy and this person's talking to me, or I'm feeling a certain way that makes me feel like I'm taking things personally. What are some actionable tools to sort of combat that in the moment?
yes. So I wish I had some like shiny object that was like the magic tool. But and some people will be like, "Are you kidding me? That's it?" And really, that is it. Your breath. You always have your breath, and there's so much science behind it. If you really want to go read about it, go read about it. But literally, your breath controls everything. Your breath controls your blood flow, your heart rate, your blood pressure. Like it controls so much. And so when we're holding our breath, we're sending signals to our brain that we're stressed out or there's something wrong, and so our brain is like, okay, let's shoot a bunch of cortisol into your body because you need to be protected, you need to be on fight or flight, your fear responses need to save you.
Mhm.
And so if you're sitting there and you're taking something personally and your chest is tight, or you're, like you said, your hands are getting clammy or whatever's happening, it's really important to get back into your body, because what's happening is your brain is saying, I'm going to keep you safe whether you like it or not. And you have the opportunity with your breath to tell your brain, no, brain, it's okay. I might be a little scared. I might feel a little uneasy right now, but I can get through this. And that is all done through intentional breathing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. And I think that's about just being more mindful, right? Because when it's
Yes.
happening, if we can bring the breath in, and this is with a lot of different emotions, right? Like this can be with
Mm-hmm.
so many things, that not just taking things personally, but if you're feeling X, Y, and Z, and then you're able to bring your breath to the now, to the moment, then I also think that it's like oxygen to the brain can have an effect on more reasonable thoughts,
Yeah.
because we get into that place where we're having those unreasonable thoughts or negative self-talk or whatever it is that's bringing us to that certain emotion, that the breath can then just like bring us to the mindfulness piece of, okay, is
Mm-hmm.
this real? Does it have to be real? Is there data to like back it up? That kind of thing. Or just acknowledging I'm having this feeling in this moment. Yeah, it doesn't have to say anything about me or my life or anything like that. But it's like the bringing the into the present and acknowledging what I'm feeling, but moving through it.
Yes. And not letting your
Yeah.
brain be like, that thing in the past, remember that? Guess what? We got to protect you from that now. Because no, your brain can't tell the difference between when whatever that was happened and this current moment where you're being triggered for whatever reason, right? And oftentimes we want to figure out the reason. Sometimes figuring out the reason is important, but other times it's not really effective. It's just stop living in the past, helping your brain learn not to live in the past, helping your brain not learn not to live in the future, and be with yourself right here, right now.
Yeah, definitely. And kind of along that line where you were saying, like what story are you telling yourself? I like to talk about that too. And I believe as like thought leaders, we can incite listeners to take action by showing them the other side of the story, right? And like how life feels when you decide to change your view of an experience by not taking things personally. So, if you were to, are there like certain questions that you would ask yourself in the moment, or like one simple action or tool that towards changing your view of your experience by not taking things personally? Like, what would you ask yourself, or what would you do? Like one simple thing in the moment. I know we talked about the breathing, but is there anything that you sort of like say to yourself or question your thoughts?
Yes. So the breathing is the first step, right? And then once you're settled back into your body in that moment, the next step is the thought process. And so one of my favorite quotes is actually I have a couple. I'm enough just as I am, right? So in my story is this full of this head trash and this stuff that's not serving me. My reminder to get back into right now is I'm enough just as I am. And then some other questions that, like, if I'm really trying to discover in the moment and I have the space to do that in internal sort of processing, would it be nice if my self-awareness was, and then what do I want it to be? Like, no money, no time, no nothing, no obstacle is in my way. I get to just have exactly what I want. Wouldn't it be nice if my self-awareness was, and then just paint a beautiful picture of what I want that awareness to be, or what I want, whatever I'm taking personally. If I'm taking things personally, trying to think of an example of myself recently that I was taking things a little too personally. I want to say with my 8-year-old, her attitude has been quite challenging recently. And she comes home and she just barges in my office yesterday and she says, "Mommy, I'm leaving the house." And I'm like, "Okay, what makes you say, like, where is it?" Like, comes from school, not, "Hi, how are you? How was your day? Missed you. I'm so excited to see you." Nothing. I'm leaving this house. I'm like, "Okay, why are you leaving this house?" "I can't tell you." And then we go through this conversation. Now, it got to a point where I did start taking it personally. And that's because of all of my story that she has no idea about my story. And so then I had to stop. I did. I stopped and took a breath. I did set a boundary with her as well. And I asked myself, as we're talking, I'm asking myself, how do I want this conversation to go? Because if she really wants to leave, what's happening for her, and how do I discover that, instead of my, like, "How dare you, kid, you're lucky to have the home that you have," right? That's my internal story, is I didn't have a home like this, so I don't want to hear that you don't want a home like this. And that is my stuff that I have to navigate.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so we're going through the breath, and then we're
Yes.
going through, there was a word, did you say thought process? Um, is that what you called
Yes,
it?
your internal
Yes,
processing of
internal
your
thought
information.
process.
Yeah.
Okay. And so basically that could be in the form of a question, like questioning what you're
Or
thinking, or
mantra.
some sort of affirmation,
Hmm.
something to validate who the person you are, regardless of the situation or feeling. So that is
To
beautiful.
you
I like
too.
it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Can you repeat the first when you said I am enough?
Enough just as I am.
I am enough just as I am. So good.
Mm,
So good.
thank
All
you.
right. So I would love for you to share about your business and how listeners can connect with you,
Sure.
and learn more from you.
Yeah, so my organization is called Safety in Freedom. Oftentimes, we give up a little bit of safety for a little bit of freedom, and my goal is to help teach people to break free from the societal expectations and stigmas, and break into what their freedom looks like to them, living life by design, not by default. So I work with couples and families on the connection, the deep, safe, intimate connections, and how to have that from how they would like to have it, not how society says they have to have it. And they can connect with me, Facebook, email, website. Website is www.safetyinfreedom.com. And same thing with Facebook.
Very cool. Thank you
Yeah.
so much, Stephanie. This has been a great conversation, and I know it will be impactful to the listeners. So thank you for being
Yeah.
here.
Thank you.
All right, y'all. It is time for the quote of the episode. This quote is from a book from authors Mark and Angel called A Thousand Little Things. Note to self: even when it seems personal, Rarely do people do things because of you. They do things because of them. You know this is true. You may not be able to control all the things people say and do to you, but you can decide not to be reduced by them. Take that into your week, your month, and maybe even your year, and work on that muscle of not taking things personally. As always, thank you for being here. Thank you for being in my community. I'm so glad you showed up today, and let's go get there. Look at you, crushing it. Thank you for joining me for another episode of the Tailor Made Tasty podcast. My hope is you always leave with a takeaway to implement in your own goal-crushing journey. I would love if you could take a moment to leave a review. And if you're looking for a community of goal boss badasses just like you, be sure to check out tailormadetasty.com/membership.